2 weeks. That's all it took for my loving husband Tobias and his mistress Clara to plan my death down to the last detail. While I stood frozen behind my own office door, listening to them rehearse my tragic accident, I realized that sometimes the only way to survive is to disappear completely. Now they think I'm dead, and I'm about to watch their perfect crime become their perfect nightmare. My name is Caroline Mitchell, and until 14 days ago, I thought I was living the perfect life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Successful architectural firm owner, beautiful home in the hills of Clearwater Springs, and a marriage to Tobias that everyone envied. I was wrong about everything. It started with a forgotten laptop charger. Such a small thing, really. I'd driven back to my office that Tuesday evening around 9 p.m. to grab it, planning to work from home the next morning. The building was supposed to be empty. Our staff always left by 6 p.m., and Tobias, my business partner and husband of 12 years, had told me he was having drinks with his college buddy Mason. But as I approached my corner office on the 3rd floor, I heard voices. Tobias's voice, low and intense, and another voice I recognized with a sinking feeling, Clara Westbrook, our newest junior architect. The 28-year-old blonde with ambitious eyes and a smile that seemed just a little too practiced. Should have announced myself, should have walked right in. Instead, something in their tone made me freeze just outside the partially open door, my hand inches from the handle. "The insurance policy is solid," Clara was saying, her voice carrying that breathy quality she used when she wanted something. $2.5 million, but we have to be careful about the timing. "I know the timing," Tobias replied, and there was an edge to his voice I'd never heard before. Sharp. Cold. "The bridge project site visit is perfect. Remote location, no witnesses, and with the recent rains, the ground is unstable. An accidental fall? A tragic workplace accident?" My laptop bag slipped from my numb fingers, hitting the carpeted floor with a soft thud. I pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering so loudly I was certain they could hear it. "You're sure she'll go alone?" Clara's voice carried a note of anxiety. Caroline always does the initial site surveys herself. Control freak habit. She'll drive out to Ravens Point Bridge Thursday morning, just like she has for every major project in the past 8 years. The only difference this time is that she won't be coming back. The words hit me like physical blows. They were talking about killing me. My husband of 12 years and his mistress were calmly discussing my murder like they were planning a dinner party. "And after?" Clara pressed. "After the funeral, there'll be a period of grief, of course. Maybe 6 months before we start seeing each other publicly. By then, I'll have controlling interest in Mitchell & Associates. The insurance money will have cleared, and we can start our new life together." I listened in growing horror as they discussed details with chilling precision. How Tobias would suggest I visit the bridge site to assess the storm damage. How Clara would create a scheduling conflict that would prevent anyone from accompanying me. How they'd arranged for the safety railing to be accidentally compromised during routine maintenance. "What about her phone?" Clara asked. "GPS tracking?" "Already handled. I've been borrowing her phone occasionally, updating the location settings. Disabled the emergency fall detection and automatic crash notification. When she goes over that cliff, it'll look like she tried to call for help but couldn't get a signal. They might not even find the body for days." The casual way he discussed. The disposal of my corpse made bile rise in my throat. This man I'd shared a bed with, built a business with, trusted with every aspect of my life, was methodically planning to erase me from existence. "You're absolutely certain about the railing?" Clara's practical tone suggested she'd done this before, which sent fresh chills through me. Mason's construction crew finished the safety inspection yesterday. The bolts are loosened just enough. One good push against it, and down she goes. 30-foot drop onto rocks. Even if the fall doesn't kill her, she'll be too injured to climb back up. Mason. I felt another piece of my world crumble. Tobias's college friend, the one who'd been the best man at our wedding, was part of this conspiracy. How long had they been planning this? How many people were involved? "And you can live with this?" Clara asked, but her tone suggested curiosity rather than moral concern. "Caroline's been in my way for too long," Tobias replied with stunning coldness. "She controls the business decisions, holds the majority shares, insists on reviewing every major contract. With her gone, I'll finally have the freedom to run things properly. Plus, that insurance money will fund the expansion I've been planning for years." "Our expansion," Clara corrected pointedly. "Of course, our expansion, our future, our life together." I heard movement inside the office and realized they were probably embracing. The thought of them touching while discussing my death made my stomach churn. But more than nausea, I felt something else building inside me. A cold, calculating fury that surprised me with its intensity. They thought they were so clever, so thorough. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed I was the same trusting, naive woman who'd never questioned Tobias's late nights or Clara's lingering glances. They had no idea that by revealing their plan, they'd just given me the ultimate advantage. As I listened to them discuss a few more logistical details, timing, alibis, how to act appropriately grief-stricken, my mind was already racing. Ahead. They expected Caroline Mitchell to die on Thursday morning at Ravens Point Bridge. And, in a way, maybe she would. But the woman who would rise from that death would be someone they'd never seen before. Someone who'd learned from the best teachers possible. Them. Someone who understood that in a world where the people closest to you could plan your murder with such casual efficiency, survival required a different set of rules. "We should go," Clara finally said. "Security might do a late round." "You're right. Thursday morning, then. By noon, this will all be over." I pressed myself deeper into the shadows as I heard chairs scraping and footsteps approaching the door. My mind was already working, forming the outline of a plan that would turn their perfect crime into their perfect destruction. They wanted Caroline Mitchell dead? Fine. But they never specified which Caroline Mitchell they were killing, and they certainly never imagined that the woman they thought they were murdering might have plans of her own. As their footsteps faded down the hallway, I remained frozen. In place, my laptop bag still on the floor, my world forever changed. But for the first time in my life, instead of feeling helpless, I felt dangerous. Thursday morning couldn't come soon enough. That night, I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to the 24-hour diner on Route 9, ordered coffee I couldn't taste, and sat in a corner booth planning my death. Not the death Tobias and Clara had scripted for me, but the one I was going to give them. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app. Everything I'd overheard needed to be documented while it was fresh. Names, times, locations, the exact method they'd planned. But as I typed, a larger picture began to emerge, one that revealed just how perfectly positioned I was to destroy them. They thought they knew me. Predictable Caroline who always did site visits alone. Trusting Caroline who never questioned Tobias's business decisions. Naive Caroline who didn't notice her husband's affair. But what they didn't know was that Caroline Mitchell had built a successful architectural firm from nothing by being 3 steps ahead of everyone else. I scrolled through my phone's contacts, stopping at a name I hadn't called in months. Nikita Rhodes, private investigator. We'd met 2 years ago when I'd hired her to conduct background checks on potential employees after a theft incident. What started as a professional relationship had evolved into an unexpected friendship built on mutual respect for each other's attention to detail. The phone rang twice before her familiar voice answered. "Caroline, it's late. Everything okay?" "Nikita, I need your help. How quickly can you meet me?" There was a pause. Nikita had excellent instincts. 20 minutes. The diner on Route 9? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. You know me too well. I'll be there. While I waited, I continued documenting everything I could remember about the past few months. Clara's hiring had been Tobias's idea. He'd pushed for her despite my reservations about her limited experience. The life insurance policy increase had been his suggestion too, claiming we needed better coverage as the business grew. Even Mason's construction crew getting the bridge maintenance contract suddenly made sinister sense. Nikita arrived exactly 20 minutes later, her sharp eyes immediately assessing my state. Mid-40s, silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing jeans and a leather jacket despite the late hour. She slid into the booth across from me without ordering anything. "Talk to me." I told her everything, watching her, expression grow more serious with each detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, processing. "This is extensive planning," she finally said. "We're not talking about a crime of passion here. This is premeditated murder with multiple conspirators. How long do you think they've been planning this?" "That's what I need to find out." "But Nikita." "I don't want to go to the police. Not yet." Her eyebrows rose. "Caroline, these people are planning to kill you in 3 days." "I know. But if I go to the police now, what do I have? Hearsay. An overheard conversation. Tobias will deny everything. Claim I misunderstood. Maybe suggest I'm having some kind of breakdown. He's charming, respected in the community. Clara's young and beautiful. She'll play the innocent victim. Mason will back up whatever story they tell." Nikita nodded slowly. "And even if the police believe you, the best they could do is arrest them for conspiracy. With good lawyers, they might get minimal sentences, maybe even probation. They'd be out in a few years, angry and more careful next time." "Exactly." "I want them destroyed, Nikita. Completely. I want them to lose everything they tried to steal from me, and I want it done in a way that ensures they can never threaten anyone else again." A slow smile spread across Nikita's face. "Now you're talking my language. What did you have in mind?" I leaned forward, lowering my voice even though the diner was nearly empty. "What if Caroline Mitchell really did die on Thursday morning? What if she had an accident at Ravens Point Bridge just like they planned?" "I'm listening. They expect me to drive out there alone. They've loosened the safety railing. They think they have the perfect plan, but what if their perfect victim disappears before she reaches their perfect death trap?" Nikita's eyes lit up with understanding. "You want to stage your own death. I want to give them exactly what they think they want. A dead Caroline Mitchell, a grief-stricken widower, and a clear path to everything they've been scheming for. Let them have their moment of triumph. Let them think they've gotten away with murder. And then? Then we document everything they do after they think I'm dead. The insurance claims, the business takeover, how quickly Tobias and Clara stop hiding their relationship. We build an airtight case of motive, means, and opportunity. When the time is right, we resurrect Caroline Mitchell and destroy their entire world." Nikita was quiet for several minutes, her investigator's mind working through the logistics. "It's dangerous. If something goes wrong, if they realize you're alive, they'll try to kill me for real." "I know. But Nikita, I have advantages they don't know about. I've been handling the firm's finances for 12 years. I know where every penny is, which accounts Tobias has access to, and which ones he doesn't. Even know exist. I have backup plans for backup plans." "What kind of backup plans?" I pulled out my phone and showed her a banking app. "Offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Set up 5 years ago as a hedge against business liability issues. Tobias doesn't know it exists. There's enough money in there to disappear for months if necessary." "Smart. What else?" "Security cameras. I had a system installed last year after the employee theft. Tobias thinks they only cover the main entrances. but I had additional cameras placed in strategic locations, including his office. Nikita's smile grew wider. You recorded their planning session. Not tonight, unfortunately. But if they're going to be taking over my business and claiming my insurance money, they'll need to have more meetings. And I'll be ready for them. This is elaborate and risky. Are you absolutely sure you want to go this route instead of just calling the police? I thought about Tobias's cold voice discussing my disposal, Clara's casual questions about my murder, Mason's willingness to sabotage equipment that could kill me. They've been planning this for months, maybe years. They've involved multiple people, compromised safety equipment, manipulated insurance policies. This isn't just about killing me, it's about a complete takeover of my life's work. And you want them to face consequences that match the scope of their crime. I want them to experience the same terror they planned for me. I want them to lose everything they tried to steal. And I want to make sure they spend the rest of their lives in prison where they can't hurt anyone else. Nikita reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Then let's plan a death that will destroy the living. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to kill Caroline Mitchell, they'd created something far more dangerous. A woman with nothing left to lose and everything to gain from their destruction. By dawn, we had the outline of a plan that would turn their perfect crime into their perfect nightmare. Wednesday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching my mood as I sat in my car across the street from Mitchell and Associates, watching through binoculars as my own life was systematically dismantled. Nikita had spent the night pulling strings, calling in favors, and setting up the infrastructure we'd need for my disappearance. Now it was time to understand exactly how deep this conspiracy ran. At 8:15 a.m., Clara arrived at the office. Punctual as always, but today I noticed things I'd been blind to before. The way she parked in the spot closest to Tobias's designated space. How she used her keycard to enter the building. When had we given her after-hours access? The confident stride of someone who already considered herself the owner. 20 minutes later, Tobias pulled up in his black BMW. He sat in the car for several minutes, talking on his phone with animated gestures. I couldn't hear the conversation, but his body language suggested he was coordinating something important, probably confirming the final details of my scheduled death. My phone buzzed with a text from Nikita. Package delivered to your P.O. box. New identity documents, credit cards, everything you need. You sure about the timeline? I typed back. Tomorrow. Morning, no changes. Through my binoculars, I watched Tobias enter the building. 30 seconds later, he appeared in the conference room window on the second floor. Clara joined him, along with a third figure I recognized, Miles Patterson, our company's insurance agent. My blood ran cold. They were having a meeting about my life insurance policy less than 24 hours before they planned to kill me. I started my car and drove to a position where I could see into the conference room more clearly. Pulling out the high-powered camera lens Nikita had provided, I began photographing everything. Miles had a stack of documents spread across the table. Even from this distance, I could see the familiar letterhead of Pinnacle Life Insurance. My phone rang. The caller ID showed Tobias. For a moment, I considered not answering, but that would be suspicious. Caroline Mitchell would answer her husband's call. "Hey, honey," I said, injecting false warmth into my voice. "Caroline, where are you? I thought you'd be in the office by now." "Running errands." "Why? Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine. I just had a quick question about the Ravens Point project. You're still planning to do the site visit tomorrow morning, right?" The casual way he asked the question, knowing he was sentencing me to death, made my skin crawl. "Yes, first thing in the morning. Why?" "No reason. Just wanted to make sure the timeline was on track. The client is eager for our assessment." "Of course they are." I watched through my camera as he gestured to Clara and Miles. "I should be in around 10. Are you in meetings all morning?" "Just some administrative stuff with Clara and Miles. Nothing urgent. Administrative stuff, like discussing how quickly they could claim my life insurance. Okay, I'll see you soon. After hanging up, I called Nikita. They're meeting with the insurance agent right now. Miles Patterson from Pinnacle Life. Can you dig into him? Already on it. Caroline, I found. Something else. Your husband's been busy with more than just planning your death. What do you mean? Financial records show he's been moving money around for the past 6 months. Small amounts. Nothing that would trigger automatic alerts, but consistent transfers. To offshore accounts. He's been skimming from the business. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. How much? So far, about 200,000. But that's just what I can trace. There might be more. He's been stealing from our company while planning to murder me for the insurance money. Gets worse. I ran background checks on Clara Westbrook. Her real name is Clara Martinez, and this isn't her first time working for an architectural firm where someone died under suspicious circumstances. The blood drained from my face. What? 3 years ago, Portland, Oregon. She worked for Hudson Design Associates. The owner, David Hudson, died in a construction site accident, fell into a foundation excavation. Clara inherited his share of the business through a hastily updated will that made her a partner just weeks before his death. I sat in stunned silence as the implications sank in. She's done this before. And David Hudson's business partner? A man named Marcus Chen who disappeared 6 months after Hudson's death. Never found the body. Chen. The name triggered a memory. Nikita. Clara asked about a previous employee reference when we hired her. Said she'd worked with someone named Chen in Portland. I thought it was just a coincidental reference. Nothing coincidental about it. Marcus Chen was David Hudson's partner, and according to Portland PD, he was the primary suspect in Hudson's death until he vanished. Case went cold. My hands were shaking now. How many people has she killed? Unknown. But Caroline, there's more. I found marriage records for Clara Martinez. She was married to Marcus Chen. She was married to Hudson's partner? Gets better. Or worse, depending on your perspective. Marcus Chen changed his name after leaving Portland. Want to guess what he changed it to? A horrible suspicion was forming in my mind. Tell me. Mason Richards. Your husband's best friend Mason is Clara's missing husband, the man suspected of murdering David Hudson. The world tilted sideways. Mason, who'd been best man at our wedding, who'd been part of our lives, for over a decade, was not only involved in planning my murder. He was a serial killer married to another serial killer. They're a team, I whispered into the phone. This is what they do. Find successful business owners, infiltrate their lives, and kill them for their money. And they've been planning your death since the day Clara walked into your office. Watched through my camera as the 3 conspirators continued their meeting. Miles was showing them documents, pointing to specific clauses. Tobias was taking notes. Clara sat back in her chair with the satisfied expression of someone whose plan was proceeding perfectly. Nikita, we need to change our approach. This isn't just about my husband having an affair and wanting my money. These people are professional killers. They've done this before, and they'll do it again after me. What are you thinking? I'm thinking we don't just want to expose them. We want to connect them to their previous crimes. We want to give the families of their other victims justice too. That's going to require more time, more evidence. Then we better make sure my death is very convincing, because I have a feeling that once they think they've killed Caroline Mitchell, they'll get sloppy. And when serial killers get sloppy, they leave trails back to all their other victims. Through the camera lens, I watched Tobias shake Miles's hand. The meeting was ending. Soon, they'd be calling to confirm that everything was in place for tomorrow, morning's accident. But what they didn't know was that tomorrow morning, Caroline Mitchell would indeed die. And from her ashes would rise someone with the knowledge, resources, and motivation to destroy not just them, but their entire murderous operation. I started my car and drove away, no longer the victim of their conspiracy, but the architect of their destruction. That evening, I did something I never thought I'd do. I broke into my own office building. Using my keycard would create a digital trail, so Nikita had provided me with equipment that would temporarily disable the security system. At 11 p.m., when the building was empty, I slipped inside like a ghost haunting my own life. The hidden camera I'd installed in Tobias's office had been recording continuously for the past 6 months. What I found on those recordings made my blood run cold and my resolve harden into something unbreakable. The conspiracy went back even further than I'd imagined. Sitting in the darkness of my office, watching footage on my laptop, I saw the methodical dismantling of my life unfold and fast forward. The first recording showing Clara and Tobias together was dated 8 months ago, 2 weeks before her official interview for the junior architect position. "The target is perfect," Clara said in that early footage, her voice clinical and detached. "Successful business, no children, substantial life insurance, and a husband who's already proven he can be manipulated." "Manipulated how?" Tobias asked, and I realized with horror that even then, he was already committed to my murder. "You've been skimming from the business accounts for 6 months without her noticing. She trusts you completely. Men like you are our favorite type of partner, already corrupt, just needing direction." I watched my husband nod eagerly, like a student receiving praise from a teacher. The dynamic was clear. Clara was the mastermind, Tobias the willing accomplice, and I was the mark they'd selected for destruction. The recordings revealed the careful methodology behind their selection process. They'd researched dozens of potential targets before settling on me. Small architectural firms with successful female owners, substantial assets, and male business partners who showed signs of financial irregularities or personal weaknesses. "Why Caroline specifically?" Tobias asked, in another recording. "Several factors," Clara replied, consulting a tablet. "Strong life insurance policy, successful business with growth potential, substantial personal assets, and most importantly, an isolated social structure. No close family members who might ask inconvenient questions, limited social circle, workaholic lifestyle that provides cover for extended absences." They'd analyzed my life like a financial statement, identifying assets and vulnerabilities with terrifying precision. I watched them discuss my daily routines, my business practices, even my exercise schedule and dietary habits. "The site visit protocol is perfect." Mason's voice joined the conversation in a recording from 6 months ago. "She always goes alone, always follows the same route, always parks in the same spot. Classic creature of habit." "And the bridge location?" Clara asked. "Ideal. Remote enough for privacy, dangerous enough to make an accident believable, and the recent storm damage provides perfect cover for equipment failure. The safety railing will appear to have failed due to structural weakness from the flooding." I paused the recording, my hands shaking. They'd been planning my death since before Clara was even officially hired. The job interview, the friendly conversations, the gradual integration into our office dynamics. All of it had been orchestrated with my murder as the end goal. But the most chilling discovery was yet to come. Hidden in encrypted files on Tobias's computer, I found detailed dossiers on their previous victims. David Hudson in Portland was just the beginning. Over the past 5 years, they'd killed at least 7 people across 4 different states. The pattern was consistent and horrifying. Clara would infiltrate a small, successful business by applying for entry-level positions. She'd identify male partners or employees with access to finances and questionable ethics. Mason would establish himself in the community through his construction business, gaining access to buildings and infrastructure. Together, they'd manipulate their chosen accomplice into betraying the business owner, then arrange an accident that eliminated both the owner and, eventually, the accomplice. In Portland, Marcus Chen hadn't disappeared voluntarily. He'd been their second victim, killed once he'd served his purpose in David Hudson's murder. The same pattern repeated across Oregon, Nevada, Arizona, and Colorado. Always small architectural or engineering firms, always involving construction accidents, always leaving behind grieving accomplices who'd eventually meet their own tragic ends. "Why do you kill the partners too?" Tobias asked in one recording, and I held my breath waiting for the answer. "Witnesses are liabilities," Clara replied matter-of-factly. "Besides, the insurance money and business assets are easier to manage, without complications. You'll understand the benefits once Caroline is gone, and we've had time to consolidate everything." The casual way she discussed murdering Tobias after killing me made me nauseous. He was so focused on betraying me that he couldn't see he was signing his own death warrant. I found detailed timelines for their post-murder plans. 6 months after my death, they'd arranged for Tobias to have his own accident, probably a construction site incident involving Mason's equipment. Clara would inherit everything as his grieving new wife, having married him shortly after my funeral. She'd sell the business, cash out the insurance policies, and disappear to start the cycle again somewhere else. But the most revealing discovery was a conversation recorded just 3 days ago. "Are you sure about the timeline?" Tobias asked, showing nervous doubts for the first time. "The timeline is perfect," Clara assured him. "Caroline dies Thursday morning. You play the grieving widower for a few weeks while I comfort you. We marry, quietly in about 4 months, citing mutual support through grief. I help you run the business, and you have your own accident in 8 to 10 months. I sell everything and move to establish our next operation. Next operation? Phoenix. I've already identified a promising target. Elena Rodriguez owns a landscape architecture firm, recently increased her life insurance, and has a business partner with gambling debts. They already had their next victim selected. After destroying my life and killing Tobias, they'd move on to Elena Rodriguez and repeat the entire murderous cycle. I copied everything onto encrypted drives, my architect's mind organizing the evidence, into a comprehensive case file. Names, dates, locations, methods, financial records. Everything needed to connect them to 7 murders across 5 years. But as I prepared to leave the office, I made one final discovery that changed everything. Hidden in Clara's desk drawer was a burner phone containing text conversations with someone identified only as the broker. "Clearwater Springs operation proceeding on schedule," Clara had texted 2 days ago. "Excellent. Seattle client is ready for next assignment. Same parameters as previous requests." "Understood. We'll relocate after cleanup completion." They weren't just serial killers working alone. They were part of a larger network, taking contracts to eliminate specific targets. Someone was paying them to kill successful business owners, and after murdering me, they'd be moving on to a paid assignment in Seattle. I photographed every message, every contact, every piece of evidence that could expose not just my would-be murderers, but the entire criminal enterprise they worked for. As I slipped out of the building and into the night, I realized that faking my death wasn't just about saving my own life anymore. It was about stopping a killing machine that had been operating with impunity for years, destroying lives and businesses across the western United States. Tomorrow morning, Caroline Mitchell would die as planned. But what would rise from that death would be something they never expected. A woman with the evidence, resources, and determination to destroy not just them, but their entire murderous network. The hunters were about to become the hunted. With only hours remaining before my scheduled death, I found myself driving through the empty streets of Clearwater Springs at 3 a.m., my mind rewriting the history of my marriage with the brutal clarity that comes from discovering you've been living with a stranger. Every memory now carried a different weight, every moment of happiness tainted by the knowledge that Tobias had been calculating ways to destroy me. I pulled into the parking lot of our first apartment building, now converted into condos, and sat staring at the window where we'd once shared dreams about building something together. The signs had been there from the beginning, hidden beneath layers of charm and carefully constructed romance. I'd met Tobias 12 years ago at a conference on sustainable architecture. He was working for a small firm in Denver, charming and ambitious, with an easy smile that had drawn me in immediately. Within 6 months, he'd moved to Clearwater Springs to be with me. Within 2 years, we were married and he'd become my business partner. Now I understood that timeline differently. Tobias hadn't fallen in love with me at that conference. He'd been scouting potential targets. My presentation on innovative small firm business models hadn't impressed him romantically. It had identified me as someone worth infiltrating and eventually destroying. The business partnership proposal should have been my first red flag. 6 months after our wedding, Tobias had suggested combining our resources to expand Mitchell Architecture into Mitchell & Associates. Think of what we could accomplish together, he'd said, his hand warm on mine as we sat at this very building's coffee shop. Your vision, my connections, our shared future. I'd been so blinded by love and ambition that I'd ignored the practical concerns. Why did he need equal partnership when he was bringing limited capital and no established client base? Why was he so insistent on having access to all financial accounts? Why did he push so hard for the life insurance increases? The memory of our insurance agent's visit last year now felt like a scene from a horror movie. Miles Patterson had arrived at our home office with a presentation about proper financial protection for growing businesses. Tobias had done most of the talking, asking detailed questions about payout timelines, beneficiary procedures, and claim processing. What happens if something happens to Caroline? He'd asked with what I'd interpreted as loving concern. How quickly could the business continue operations? Miles had explained the process thoroughly. Too thoroughly, I now realized. The conversation had lasted 2 hours, covering every aspect of death benefits, business succession, and asset transfer. I'd signed the papers thinking I was protecting our future. Instead, I'd been signing my death warrant. The financial irregularities stretched back years further than Nikita had initially discovered. Armed with my complete access to business records, I'd spent the early morning hours tracing every suspicious transaction. Tobias hadn't started stealing 6 months ago. He'd been systematically embezzling from our company almost from the day he became my partner. Small amounts at first, cleverly disguised as legitimate business expenses. Vendor payments to companies. That didn't exist. Travel reimbursements for trips that never happened. Equipment purchases that were never delivered. Over 11 years, he'd stolen nearly $500,000 from our joint enterprise. But the most damaging discovery was how he'd been sabotaging my professional relationships. 3 major clients had mysteriously canceled contracts in the past 2 years, citing concerns about the firm's direction. I'd assumed it was normal. Business fluctuation. But phone records showed Tobias had been in contact with all 3 clients immediately before their cancellations. He'd been systematically undermining my reputation while stealing my money, creating the financial stress. That would make my death seem like a relief to creditors and business associates. The perfect setup for a grieving widower who'd struggle briefly before discovering that his late wife had been making poor business decisions. Even our social isolation had been orchestrated. Tobias had gradually discouraged friendships, suggesting my college friends were too demanding, or that my professional colleagues were taking advantage of my generosity. One by one, I'd pulled back from relationships that might have provided support or asked inconvenient questions about my sudden death. You work too much, he'd always said. We should focus on us, on building our life together. Now I understood that isolating me had been part of the plan from the beginning. Fewer close relationships meant fewer people who might investigate. Suspicious circumstances surrounding my demise. The construction contracts Mason had won over the past 3 years suddenly made perfect sense. Bridge maintenance, building renovations, safety inspections, all providing him with legitimate access to infrastructure he could sabotage. Every project had been a rehearsal for the method they'd eventually use to kill me. I remembered Tobias, encouraging me to maintain my habit of solo site visits. "It's one of your strengths as an architect," he'd said just last month. "You see things other people miss when you're alone and focused." He'd been conditioning me to follow the exact behavior pattern that would lead me to my death. The final piece of the historical puzzle was Clara's integration into our lives. She hadn't just appeared and infiltrated our business. She'd been carefully positioned and introduced through manufactured connections. The professional reference who'd recommended her had been Mason, using a fake identity and a phone number that traced back to a burner device. Every lunch invitation, every after-work drink, every friendly conversation had been designed to study my habits and identify vulnerabilities. When Clara had asked about my morning routines, my preferred routes to job sites, my tendency to work alone, I'd thought she was making friendly conversation. She'd actually been gathering intelligence for my assassination. As dawn broke over, Clearwater Springs, I sat in my car outside the home Tobias and I had shared, watching lights come on in the windows. He was probably getting ready for what he expected to be the last day of our marriage. In a few hours, he'd drive to the office, establish his alibi, and wait for the phone call confirming that Caroline Mitchell had died in a tragic accident at Ravens Point Bridge. But the woman who'd trusted him blindly for 12 years was already dead. What remained was someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous. Someone who'd learned from the best teachers possible how to plan and execute the perfect crime. Thursday morning arrived with unseasonable fog, creating the perfect atmospheric backdrop for a death that would never happen. I stood at my bathroom mirror at 6 a.m., applying makeup for the last time as Caroline Mitchell. In 2 hours, this woman would cease to exist, but her murder would be the foundation for destroying everyone who'd tried to kill her. My phone buzzed, with a text from Tobias. "Be careful at the bridge site today. Weather looks unpredictable. Love you." The casual cruelty of sending love messages while coordinating my assassination might have broken me yesterday. Today, it only strengthened my resolve. I typed back, "Always am. See you tonight for dinner." A promise I had no intention of keeping. Nikita had positioned herself at a surveillance point overlooking Ravens Point Bridge since 4 a.m. "Everything's in place," she'd texted an hour earlier. Mason's crew finished their maintenance work. "The safety railing is compromised exactly as planned. Remote cameras are recording everything." I drove my usual route to the bridge site, knowing that somewhere behind me, Mason was probably following at a distance to ensure I arrived as scheduled. The GPS tracker Tobias had secretly installed on my car would confirm my location right up until the moment I supposedly went over the cliff. Ravens Point Bridge was a 1960s concrete structure spanning Clearwater Canyon, connecting the main highway to the industrial district where several major construction projects were underway. Recent storms had washed out portions of the access road, making it legitimately dangerous for inspections. The perfect cover for an accidental death. I parked in my usual spot, grabbed my surveying equipment, and walked toward the compromised section of railing. Every step was being recorded by Mason's hidden cameras, footage they'd used to establish that I'd been alone and following normal safety procedures when the accident occurred. The sabotage was expertly done. To a casual observer, the railing appeared solid and properly maintained. But I could see where the mounting bolts had been carefully loosened, creating a section that would collapse under pressure while appearing to be a structural failure caused by storm damage. According to their plan, I would lean against the railing. While taking measurements, it would give way, and I'd plummet 30 feet onto the rocky canyon floor below. The fall might not kill me immediately, but the remote location meant help would arrive too late. By the time emergency responders reached me, Caroline Mitchell would be dead from her injuries. But Caroline Mitchell wasn't going to touch that railing. Instead, I set up my equipment at a safe distance and began the careful choreography Nikita and I had planned. Using a remote-controlled device she'd provided, I triggered a small explosive charge placed on the cliff face below the bridge. The sound echoed through the canyon like a rock slide, exactly the kind of environmental hazard that might startle someone into stepping backward against a safety barrier. I threw my clipboard and measuring tape over the edge, scattering them across the rocks below to create evidence of a fall. My car keys followed, landing in a position suggesting they'd fallen from a pocket during the tumble. The final touch was a few drops of my own blood on the compromised railing, DNA evidence that would confirm I'd been there when it failed. But instead of falling to my death, I walked to a predetermined extraction point 50 yards away, where Nikita waited with a second vehicle. Within 3 minutes of the accident, I was driving away from my own death scene while emergency responders would be rushing toward what they'd find in another hour. The timeline was crucial. Mason's cameras had recorded me approaching the railing and captured the sound of the rock slide. The footage would show my equipment falling into the canyon, confirming that I'd been present when the accident occurred. But the cameras couldn't see the extraction point, meaning there would be no visual evidence that I'd survived. My phone, left running in my car, would continue transmitting my location until the battery died, suggesting I'd been trapped in the vehicle or thrown clear during the fall. The GPS data would support the theory that I'd been at the bridge when the accident happened. Emergency services would find my car, the compromised railing, my scattered equipment, and blood evidence. But they wouldn't find a body. Not unusual in canyon accidents where victims sometimes fell into water or dense brush. Search and rescue operations could continue for days without success. Meanwhile, Caroline Mitchell was becoming someone else. Entirely. The first stop was a storage unit across town where I'd hidden supplies. Hair dye, colored contacts, different clothing, and the identity documents Nikita had arranged. Within an hour, the brunette architect Caroline Mitchell had become the blonde consultant Sarah Chen, a name I'd chosen specifically to honor the victims of Clara and Mason's previous crimes. The transformation was more than physical. Sarah. Chen was confident where Caroline had been trusting, suspicious where Caroline had been naive, and prepared for violence where Caroline had been peaceful. She had resources Caroline never knew existed, and allies Caroline had never needed. As Sarah Chen, I checked into a motel on the outskirts of town and waited for the phone calls that would confirm my death. Tobias would be the first to hear, a devastating call from the police informing him that his wife had been in a terrible accident at the bridge site. He'd rush to the scene, play the role of distraught husband, and begin the performance that would ultimately destroy him. By noon, the news would spread through Clearwater Springs. The successful architect who'd died in a tragic workplace accident, leaving behind a grieving husband and a struggling business. Clara would comfort Tobias through his grief, while Mason would provide expert testimony about how structural damage from recent storms had compromised the bridge's safety systems. They'd attend my funeral, accept condolences from the community, and begin the process of claiming my insurance money and taking over my business. For a brief, shining moment, they'd believe they'd committed the perfect crime. But perfect crimes require perfect victims, and Caroline Mitchell had never been as perfect as they'd assumed. Now, from beyond the grave, she was about to teach them that sometimes the dead can be far more dangerous than the living. From my motel room, I watched the local news report my own death with a strange sense of detachment. Local architect Caroline Mitchell presumed dead after bridge accident, the anchor announced over footage of emergency vehicles at Ravens Point. Search and rescue operations continue, but authorities say survival is unlikely given the 30-foot fall and rocky terrain, the ally. Police spokesman was professional and somber. Mrs. Mitchell's car was found at the scene with evidence suggesting she was conducting a routine site inspection when a section of storm-damaged safety railing failed. This appears to be a tragic workplace accident. Perfect. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned, both theirs and mine. My burner phone buzzed with updates from Nikita, who was monitoring police communications from her surveillance van. Tobias arrived at the scene 20 minutes ago. Performance is Oscar-worthy. Collapsed. dramatically when they showed him your blood on the railing. Mason's providing expert commentary about structural failure. Clara's maintaining professional distance but positioned herself as emotional support. I opened my laptop and logged into the remote access system I'd installed months ago to monitor our office security cameras. What I saw made my blood boil. With cold fury, they weren't even waiting for my body to be found. Less than 3 hours after my supposed death, Clara was already in my office, going through my files with surgical precision. She'd positioned herself at my desk like she belonged. There, systematically sorting through contracts, client lists, and financial documents. Every movement was confident and practiced. This wasn't grief-driven anxiety, it was professional efficiency. Tobias returned from the bridge scene around 2 p.m., his grief performance continuing even when he thought no one was watching. But the cameras caught everything as he embraced Clara in my office, their kiss lasting far too long for new lovers seeking comfort. This was the celebration of people who'd just completed a successful murder. Phase 1 complete, Clara said, pulling back from his embrace. Now we move to consolidation. How long before we can access the insurance money? Tobias asked, settling into my chair with disturbing ease. Miles says 6 weeks minimum for death certificate processing, but given the missing body, it might take longer. That's why we need to move quickly on the business assets. I watched them spread documents across my desk, papers I recognized as account transfer forms, business registration changes, and insurance beneficiary updates. They'd prepared everything in advance, just waiting for my death to make it official. But the most chilling moment came when Mason arrived with a bottle of champagne. To Caroline Mitchell, he said, raising his glass in a mock toast, who built something beautiful that we're about to make profitable. They drank champagne to celebrate my murder while sitting in my office, surrounded by the work I'd spent years building. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. My phone rang, another burner device I'd given only to Nikita. "You need to see this," she said urgently. "I've been monitoring their communications. Clara just made a call to someone called the broker. Did you record it?" Every word. "Caroline, this goes deeper than we thought. They're not just serial killers working for hire. They're part of a franchise operation." I felt ice form in my veins. "What do you mean?" "The broker recruits teams like Clara and Mason, provides them with target lists, and takes a percentage of the proceeds. It's like a consulting business for murder. They have operations running in at least 8 different states." "How many targets?" "Based on what I overheard, your death is number 47 for their organization. They're scheduled to move to Seattle next month for target 48, Elena Rodriguez, just like we discovered. But there's more. The broker mentioned something about accelerated timeline due to federal interest. Federal interest. The FBI was closing in on them, which explained why they'd moved up my murder date and were rushing through the consolidation phase. They weren't just stealing my money. They were preparing to disappear before law enforcement could connect them to their other crimes. I switched camera feeds to the conference room where they were now meeting with Miles Patterson. The insurance agent looked nervous, constantly checking his phone and shifting in his seat. "Are you certain about the accident staging?" Miles asked, his voice strained. "The police are asking very specific questions about the structural failure." "The evidence is perfect," Mason replied confidently. "Storm damage? Compromised bolts? Routine inspection gone wrong. I've created dozens of these scenarios. They never suspect sabotage when the environment provides such convenient cover." "What about the missing body?" "Canyon accidents are notorious for that," Clara explained. "Strong currents, wildlife, dense vegetation. Sometimes bodies are never recovered. It actually works in our favor. Creates just enough ambiguity to delay investigations while we complete the financial transfers." I watched Miles nod reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable but too invested to back out now. He'd probably been recruited the same way Tobias had. Gradual corruption, small compromises leading to larger ones, until murder seemed like a logical next step. "Timeline for the next operation?" Mason asked. 2 weeks, Clara replied, consulting her tablet. "Elena Rodriguez in Seattle. The brokers already arranged our new identities and background stories. We'll establish ourselves in the area, identify the best approach vector, and begin infiltration." "What about cleanup here?" "Tobias has his own accident in 6 months, after we've consolidated all assets. Mason disappears around the same time. Family emergency or new job opportunity. I maintain Caroline's business for a year before selling. And relocating." They'd planned Tobias's death as casually as they'd planned mine. He sat there taking notes about his own murder timeline, completely oblivious to the fact that he was signing his death warrant just as I had unknowingly done years earlier. But the most disturbing revelation came when Clara opened a laptop and showed them a database of potential targets. "The brokers identified over 200 viable candidates nationwide," she said, scrolling through profiles. "Small business owners, substantial assets, isolated social structures, corruptible partners. We could work for the next 20 years, without running out of targets. 200 people marked for death, 200 families who had no idea they were being stalked by professional killers, 200 Caroline Mitchells who needed someone to save them from the fate I'd barely escaped." As I watched them toast their success and plan their next murders, I realized my mission had expanded far beyond personal revenge. These people weren't just my enemies. They were a cancer that needed to be cut out before it could spread further. But first, I had to let them think they'd won. The deeper they committed to their celebration, the more evidence they'd provide for their own destruction. By Friday evening, exactly 24 hours after my supposed death, cracks were already appearing in their perfect plan. From my motel, room command center, I watched through multiple camera feeds as desperation began to creep into their previously confident operation. The first sign of trouble came from an unexpected source: my assistant, Misty Patterson, Miles's daughter, who'd been working part-time at the firm while finishing her business degree. Unlike the conspirators, Misty's grief was genuine, and her attention to detail was creating problems they hadn't anticipated. "Something's wrong with the client files," I heard her tell Clara through the office audio feed. "Mrs. Mitchell was supposed to meet with the Henderson project team next week, but I can't find any of her preparation notes. She always documented everything." Clara's response was smooth, but I caught the flash of concern in her eyes. Caroline was under a lot of stress lately. Maybe she was behind on her documentation. That's just it. She wasn't behind on anything else. Every other project is meticulously organized. It's like she knew something was going to happen. The truth was, I had known something was going to happen. In the 48 hours between discovering their plot and staging my death, I'd deliberately created gaps in my documentation that would raise questions. If investigators looked closely enough, they'd find a pattern suggesting I'd been preparing for something. Misty's observational skills were making Clara nervous, and nervous people make mistakes. "Maybe you should take some time off," Clara suggested. "This has been traumatic for everyone." "I'd rather keep working," Misty replied firmly. "Mrs. Mitchell gave me this opportunity, and I want to make sure her clients are taken care of properly." I smiled grimly. Misty's loyalty was about to become a serious problem for the people who'd killed her mentor. The second crack appeared when Detective Ray Sullivan from the state police arrived at the office unexpectedly. Unlike the local officers who'd handled the initial accident report, Sullivan specialized in workplace safety investigations and had a reputation for thoroughness that terrified contractors across 3 counties. "Just routine follow-up," he assured Clara and Tobias as he examined my office. "Bridge accidents involving structural failure require additional documentation for OSHA compliance." Through the cameras, I watched Sullivan methodically photograph everything. My desk setup, the client files Misty had mentioned, even the coffee cup I'd left behind. His questions were casual but pointed. Mrs. Mitchell conducted these site inspections alone? Always, Tobias replied. She was very particular about her initial assessments. Any recent concerns about safety protocols or equipment? Nothing unusual, Clara interjected. Caroline was extremely safety conscious. But Sullivan had found something that made him pause. My appointment calendar, still open on my computer screen. She had a meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning, with the structural engineer reviewing the Henderson project. That's interesting timing. Interesting how? Tobias asked, and I heard the tension creeping into his voice. Most people don't schedule meetings for the day after a dangerous site inspection, suggests she expected to be available. The detective's observation hit closer to home than they realized. I had scheduled that meeting deliberately, knowing it would create questions about my state of mind before the supposed accident. By Saturday morning, the pressure was escalating from multiple directions. Nikita reported that the FBI's white-collar crime unit had made inquiries about Mason's construction company, apparently following a trail that connected him to the Portland incidents involving David Hudson and Marcus Chen. They're not directly investigating your death yet, Nikita explained during our encrypted call. But they're looking into a pattern of construction-related accidents involving small businesses. Mason's name appeared in enough databases to trigger automated alerts that Federal attention explained why the broker was pushing for accelerated timelines. Law enforcement was closing in on their network, and my death was supposed to be their final score before disappearing. Instead, it was becoming the thread that would unravel their entire operation. Clara's response to the mounting pressure was predictably ruthless. I watched through the office cameras as she met privately with Miles, her demeanor shifting from grieving colleague to cold professional. We need to move faster, she told him bluntly. There are complications that require immediate action. What kind of complications? The kind that could put all of us in prison if we don't handle them properly. How quickly can you process the insurance claim? Miles looked increasingly uncomfortable. Caroline's only been dead for 2 days. Rushing the claim will raise red flags. Red flags are better than federal investigations. Process the paperwork this week. That's not how insurance works, Clara. There are protocols, waiting periods, investigations. Then we skip the insurance money and focus on the business assets. How much liquid capital can we access immediately? Maybe $200,000 from the operating accounts. But Tobias is only authorized for... Tobias can authorize whatever we need him to authorize. Right, Tobias? I watched my husband nod weakly, finally beginning to understand that he wasn't a partner in this operation. He was a tool being used by people far more dangerous than he'd realized. The most telling moment came when Clara received a call from the broker while she thought the cameras couldn't capture her conversation. But I'd installed audio pickups throughout the building, and every word was recorded. We have a problem, she said immediately upon answering. Local complications are developing faster than anticipated. Federal heat? The broker's voice was distorted but urgent. Possible. Plus, the victim's assistant is asking inconvenient questions, and there's a state detective showing more interest than we expected. Extraction timeline? We need to move to Phase 3 immediately. Can you arrange transportation? 48 hours. Complete the financial transfers and eliminate any loose ends. All loose ends? All of them. Clean slate protocol. I felt ice form in my veins as I realized what clean slate protocol meant. They weren't just planning to kill Tobias as originally scheduled. They were going to eliminate everyone who might pose a threat. Misty, Detective Sullivan, possibly even Miles. In trying to pressure them, I'd accidentally endangered innocent people. The urgency I'd created to force their mistakes had also accelerated their willingness to commit additional murders. But their desperation was also creating opportunities. Rushed criminals make bigger mistakes, leave more evidence, and create more witnesses. The pressure they were feeling would either destroy them or destroy everyone around them. I had 48 hours to ensure it was the former. Saturday night marked the turning point where I stopped being a victim playing dead and became a general assembling an army. The clean slate protocol had changed everything. Innocent people were now in the crosshairs, and I couldn't protect them from the shadows alone. My first recruit was already in place. Detective Sullivan's investigation had stalled on official channels, but his instincts were telling him the same thing mine were. Caroline Mitchell's death didn't add up. When he returned to the bridge site for a second examination, Nikita was waiting for him. "Detective Sullivan?" she called out as he finished photographing the compromised railing. "I think we need to talk." Through our encrypted communications, I listened as Nikita played him selected recordings from the office surveillance. His reaction was exactly what we'd hoped for, professional skepticism giving way to controlled rage as he realized he was looking at a murder disguised as an accident. "Jesus Christ," he muttered after hearing Clara and Mason's champagne toast. "How long have you been recording these people?" "Long enough to know they've done this before," Nikita replied. "And they're planning to do it again, soon." "Where's Caroline Mitchell?" The moment of truth. Everything depended on Sullivan's reaction to learning I was alive. "Safe," Nikita said simply, "and very motivated to see justice done. I need to speak with her directly." 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Detective Sullivan in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. My new identity as Sarah Chen temporarily set aside. His first question was exactly what I'd expected. "Why didn't you come to the police when you discovered the plot?" "Because I needed them to believe they'd succeeded," I explained, spreading out the evidence files I'd compiled. "Look at what we've gathered in just 3 days. Recorded confessions, financial fraud documentation, connections to previous murders across 4 states. If I'd gone to the police initially, what would you have had? Hearsay about an overheard conversation." Sullivan studied the materials with the focused attention of someone who understood the difference between suspicion and proof. "This is extensive, but it's also illegal surveillance. Conducted on my own property with my own equipment," I countered. "Everything recorded in my office is admissible. The real question is whether you want to help me save the people they're planning to kill next, or whether you want to follow procedure while they escape to murder Elena Rodriguez in Seattle." "Who's Elena Rodriguez?" I showed him the target files I'd photographed from Clara's laptop. "Their next victim. They've already been paid to kill her, after they eliminate the loose ends here in Clearwater Springs." "Loose ends?" "Misty Patterson, you, possibly Miles. Anyone who might ask uncomfortable questions or investigate too thoroughly." Sullivan's jaw tightened. "When?" The broker gave them 48 hours to complete financial transfers and execute clean slate. "Protocol. That was 12 hours ago." "We need backup. State police, FBI." "We need Misty Patterson alive," I interrupted. "She's in the most immediate danger because she's asking the right questions about my missing documentation. Every minute we spend coordinating through official channels is a minute they're using to plan her accident." That argument convinced him. Within an hour, Sullivan had contacted 2 trusted colleagues, Detective Maria Santos from the state, Police Financial Crimes Unit, and Agent Carl Morrison from the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force. Both had been investigating patterns that connected to Clara and Mason's previous operations. "The federal investigation is why they accelerated your timeline," Agent Morrison explained when we met at 2 a.m. in a secure location. "We've been tracking unexplained deaths among small business owners across the western states. The pattern was subtle until we started looking at insurance payouts and business transfers." "How many victims?" "Confirmed? 14. Suspected? At FBI. Least 30. Your situation is the first time we've had advance warning and active surveillance." Detective Santos spread out financial records on the table. "The money trail is sophisticated but traceable. They use a network of shell companies and offshore accounts, but the timing patterns are consistent. Large insurance payouts followed. By rapid business liquidations, always with the same sequence of intermediary transfers. What about the broker? We have voice samples from your recordings, but no identification yet. The network appears to be compartmentalized. Individual killing teams like Clara and Mason operate independently and report to regional coordinators. I felt the scope of the operation settling around me like a lead blanket. This wasn't just about my near murder anymore. It was about dismantling an entire criminal enterprise that had been operating with impunity for years. What's our next move? I asked. Agent. Morrison pulled out a detailed tactical plan. We protect the immediate targets while gathering evidence to prosecute the entire network. That means putting Misty Patterson in protective custody, monitoring all financial transactions, and documenting every move they make. And my role? You remain dead, Detective Sullivan said firmly. The moment they know you're alive, they either run or start killing people immediately. We need them to continue believing they're operating successfully. But we accelerate their timeline, Detective Santos added. Create pressure that forces them to make bigger mistakes while we're ready to document everything. I looked around the table at these people who'd agreed to risk their careers and lives to help me stop killers they'd never heard of until a few hours ago. Why are you doing this? You don't know me, and this is way outside normal procedure. Agent? Morrison's answer was simple. Because 30 families deserve justice for their murdered loved ones. And because Elena Rodriguez deserves to live. Detective Sullivan nodded. Besides, I've been a cop for 20 years. I can smell a setup from a mile away, and these people reek of guilt. Plus, Detective Santos added with a grim smile, it's not often we get a chance to catch serial killers in the act with their own recorded confessions. By dawn Sunday morning, we had surveillance teams positioned around every potential target, financial monitoring on all accounts associated with the conspiracy, and communication intercepts on every phone they used. Most importantly, we had a plan to turn their own timeline against them. They thought they had 36 hours to eliminate witnesses and escape. What they actually had was 36 hours to provide us with enough evidence to destroy their entire operation and everyone connected to it. The hunters had become the hunted, but they didn't know it yet. Sunday morning brought the systematic documentation of their destruction. From our mobile command center, a modified surveillance van parked 3 blocks from my office, we watched Clara, Mason, and Tobias execute their endgame with the precision of people who'd done this many times before. Agent Morrison had equipped the van with military-grade surveillance technology that made my hidden office cameras look primitive. Multiple screens showed real-time feeds from strategic locations, while sophisticated audio equipment captured conversations from hundreds of yards away. Financial transfers are beginning, Detective Santos reported, monitoring banking activity on her laptop. They've moved $200,000 from the business operating account to an offshore shell company in the Cayman Islands. Same pattern as Portland and Denver, Agent Morrison confirmed, cross-referencing with federal case files. They liquidate local assets first, then systematically drain insurance and investment accounts over the following weeks. Through the main screen, I watched Clara methodically ransacking my office, photographing documents and loading files into bankers' boxes. But her movements were hurried now, lacking the confident precision I'd observed earlier. The pressure was affecting her judgment. She's taking the client contract files, I noted. Those contain proprietary information worth more than the business accounts. Selling trade secrets to competitors? Detective Sullivan asked. Or using them to identify future targets. Several of those clients have expanded their operations recently, taken out larger insurance policies, brought in new partners. The thought that my own client relationships might be used to select future murder victims added another layer of urgency to our operation. At 9:30 a.m., Miles Patterson arrived at the office looking like a man heading to his own execution. The surveillance audio captured his conversation with Clara with crystal clarity. I can't do this anymore, he said immediately upon entering. The state police detective was asking too many specific questions about claim processing timelines. What kind of questions? About why someone would schedule meetings for the day after a dangerous site inspection, about Caroline's recent behavior patterns, about whether there were any unusual insurance policy modifications in the past year. Clara's response was ice cold. What did you tell him? Nothing specific, but he's smart enough to put pieces together. Ray Sullivan doesn't close cases that don't make sense to him. Then, we make sure he doesn't get the chance to investigate further. I watched Miles's face drain of color as the implications sank in. You're talking about killing a police detective. I'm talking about eliminating complications before they become problems. That's what you signed up for when you started taking payments for expedited claim processing. The admission was perfect for our case, but I felt sick watching Miles realize he'd become complicit in planning the murder of a law enforcement officer. I never agreed to kill cops, he protested weakly. You agreed to whatever was necessary. To protect our operation. Detective Sullivan is now a threat to our operation. Agent Morrison was already on his radio, coordinating with state police headquarters to ensure Sullivan's protection. But the conversation provided something even more valuable. Confirmation that Miles had been taking payments for insurance. Fraud across multiple cases. How many other claims has he processed for your organization? Detective Santos asked. Let's find out. I pulled up financial records on my tablet, cross-referencing insurance payouts with Miles's employment history. He's been with Pinnacle Life for 8 years. During that time, he processed claims for 7 suspicious deaths. All connected to Clara and Mason's operation? Different names, but the pattern matches. Small business owners, workplace accidents, rapid claim processing, and substantial payouts. The scope of Miles's involvement made him either a dedicated co-conspirator or a victim of long-term manipulation. Either way, his recorded confession would help us build cases against the entire network. At 11 a.m., Mason arrived with news that sent chills through everyone in the van. Transportation's arranged, he announced. Private airfield, 2 hours drive from here. Plane leaves at midnight for Vancouver, connecting to Singapore. What about the loose ends? Clara asked. Misty Patterson first. She's alone at her apartment, preparing for her Monday classes. Make it look like a break-in gone wrong. And Detective Sullivan? Car accident on Route 47. Dangerous curves, recent rain damage, easy to arrange brake failure. Agent Morrison immediately dispatched teams to protect both targets while we continued recording their planning session. Timeline for Tobias? Clara continued, and I watched my husband's face as he realized they were discussing his murder with the same casual efficiency they'd used for mine. After we're safely out of the country. Remote activation of gas leak in your shared home. Tragic accident. Grieving widower overcome by fumes. The callous way they planned Tobias's death while he sat right there was almost surreal. He'd been so focused on betraying me that he'd never considered they might betray him. What about the Seattle operation? Tobias asked, apparently still not understanding that he wouldn't be alive to participate. Elena Rodriguez is confirmed. For next month. The brokers already arranged our new identities and background stories. By Christmas, we'll have completed that operation and moved on to Phoenix. Detective Santos was frantically taking notes, building a federal case that would span multiple states and potentially dozens of victims. We have enough evidence to arrest them right now, Agent Morrison said quietly. Multiple confessions, financial fraud, conspiracy to commit murder. But if we arrest them now, we don't get the broker or the rest of the network, I pointed out. Elena Rodriguez is still a target, and there are probably teams operating in other states we don't know about. So what do you suggest? I watched. Clara, Mason, and Tobias finalize their plans to murder innocent people before fleeing the country to kill more victims. We let them try to eliminate the loose ends, under controlled circumstances, with full protection for the targets. Force them to commit additional crimes while we're recording everything. That's incredibly dangerous. So is letting a murder network escape to kill Elena Rodriguez and whoever comes after her. The decision would define not just our case against these three killers, but potentially our ability to dismantle an entire criminal enterprise that had been operating with impunity for years. By noon, we had everything we needed to arrest them. But what we needed was everything required to destroy them and everyone they worked with. The next 12 hours would determine whether we saved 3 potential victims or 30 future ones. Sunday afternoon became a chess game played across multiple locations, with innocent lives as pawns and justice as the ultimate prize. From our command center, we orchestrated a complex operation designed to protect the targets while gathering irrefutable evidence of attempted murder. Misty Patterson was the first piece we needed to position carefully. Detective Sullivan personally handled her extraction, arriving at her apartment disguised as a maintenance worker while she was studying for Monday's business law exam. "Miss Patterson? I need to check your gas lines. There have been reports of leaks in this building." Through the surveillance equipment we'd planted, I watched Misty let him in, completely unaware that 2 blocks away, Mason was preparing equipment for her accidental break-in murder. "Actually, Miss Patterson, I'm Detective Sullivan with State Police," he said once inside. "Your life is in immediate danger, and I need you to come with me right now." The shock on her face was heartbreaking, but she handled the revelation with remarkable composure. "This is about Mrs. Mitchell's death, isn't it? I knew something was wrong with the whole thing." "What made you suspicious?" She was too prepared. All her personal files were organized like she was going on a long trip, and she'd updated all the client contact information just days before the accident. Mrs. Mitchell never worked that far ahead unless she was planning something big. Smart girl. Her attention to detail had not only identified problems with our cover story, but had also put her life at risk. "We're going to use your apartment to catch the people who killed your boss," Sullivan explained. "But I need you somewhere completely safe first." Within 30 minutes, Misty was in a safe house 20 miles away, replaced by Agent Santos wearing a blonde wig and armed with enough backup firepower to stop a small army. The second target required more delicate handling. Detective Sullivan's car accident was scheduled for his evening commute on Route 47, where Mason had already sabotaged guardrails and prepared equipment to cause brake failure. Agent Morrison took point on this operation, coordinating with Highway Patrol to create a controlled environment. "We'll use a decoy vehicle with remote operation capability," he explained. "Sullivan drives his normal route until the danger zone, then switches to a protected vehicle while the decoy continues to the ambush point." "What about Mason?" I asked. "Full surveillance team ready to document his attempt to cause the accident. The moment he makes his move, we have him for attempted murder of a law enforcement officer." The most complex part of our counterstrike involved Tobias's scheduled murder. The gas leak they'd planned for our shared home required us to evacuate the entire neighborhood block while maintaining the appearance that nothing had changed. "Gas company received an anonymous tip about leaks on Maple Street," Detective Santos reported. "Residents are being relocated to hotels for safety inspections while we flood the area with undercover officers." I felt a strange emptiness watching our house being evacuated. 12 years of marriage, reduced to a crime scene waiting to happen. But any sadness was overwhelmed by cold satisfaction at the trap we were setting. By 4 p.m., all pieces were in position. Misty's apartment was staffed with armed agents. Route 47 was under complete surveillance. Our house was surrounded by law enforcement disguised as utility workers. And Clara, Mason, and Tobias had no idea they were about to walk into a perfectly coordinated sting operation. The first test came at 6:30 p.m. when Mason arrived at Misty's building carrying what appeared to be standard burglary tools but were actually sophisticated breaking and entering equipment designed to make forced entry look like random crime. "Target approaching subject's apartment," Agent Santos reported through her concealed microphone. "Suspect is carrying lockpicks, glass cutter, and what appears to be a silenced weapon. From the command van, we watched Mason systematically disable the building's security system before approaching Misty's door. His movements were professional and practiced. This wasn't his first time committing murder disguised as robbery. "He's at the door," Santos whispered, picking the lock. "Remember, we need him to fully commit to the attempted murder before we move," Agent Morrison instructed. "Intent isn't enough. We need action." The tension in the van was suffocating as we watched Mason enter the apartment where Agent Santos waited in darkness. Through thermal imaging, we could see him moving room by room, weapon drawn, searching for his victim. "Target has entered the bedroom," Santos reported. "Weapon is raised. He's approaching the bed. Go, go, go!" The apartment erupted in synchronized movement as 6 federal agents stormed in from concealed positions. Mason's shocked expression, as tactical lights illuminated his raised weapon, was captured in perfect detail by multiple cameras. "Federal agents, drop your weapon." Mason's attempt to resist lasted exactly 3 seconds before he was face down on the floor with his hands zip-tied behind his back. The weapon he'd intended to use on Misty was bagged as evidence along with his breaking and entering tools. "One down," Agent Morrison announced grimly. 2 to go. The second part of our operation began an hour later when Detective Sullivan started his usual evening commute on Route 47. Hidden cameras captured Mason's equipment at the designated ambush point, hydraulic jacks positioned to create simulated brake failure, portable barriers designed to force specific vehicle trajectories, and emergency medical supplies that would never be used. "Decoy vehicle approaching the kill zone," Sullivan reported through his radio. "All systems operating normally." The remote-controlled car perfectly mimicked Sullivan's driving patterns, even using his actual license plates and vehicle identification. From a distance, Clara monitoring the operation would see exactly what she expected: a police detective driving home unaware that his brakes were about to fail catastrophically. "Hydraulic system activating," our technical specialist reported. "Vehicle control transferring to remote operation." The decoy car approached the sabotaged guardrail at exactly the speed Mason had calculated for maximum lethality. But instead of a police detective dying in a horrible accident, federal agents were recording every detail of a meticulously planned murder attempt. When the accident occurred exactly as scripted, Clara's cell phone immediately rang with a call to the broker. "Phase 2 complete," she reported. "Detective problem eliminated. Perfect." We now had recorded evidence of her celebrating what she believed was the successful murder of a law enforcement officer. But the most crucial test was yet to come. Tobias's gas leak murder was scheduled for 10 p.m., giving Clara and Mason just enough time to complete their final financial transfers before fleeing to their midnight flight. What they didn't know was that our house was now surrounded by enough federal agents to invade a small country, all waiting to document their attempt to murder my husband while he slept peacefully in a bed that would become his tomb. 3 attempted murders. 3 perfect traps. 3 opportunities to gather evidence that would destroy not just them, but the entire network they worked for. By midnight, either they'd be in federal custody facing multiple life sentences, or we'd all be dead. At 9:47 p.m., 13 minutes before Tobias's scheduled murder, everything went sideways. Clara's phone rang in our surveillance van's audio feed, and the broker's distorted voice carried an urgency that made everyone freeze. "Abort all operations immediately. Federal surveillance detected. Initiate emergency extraction protocol." "What?" Clara's shocked response echoed through our equipment. "That's impossible. We've been monitoring all communications." Mason missed his check-in. His tracker went dark 40 minutes ago. Either he's dead or arrested. I watched Clara's face through our office cameras as the reality hit her. The confident, professional killer was suddenly a panicked amateur realizing her perfect operation had been compromised. "We need to move now," she told Tobias urgently. Grab only essential documents and meet me at the backup extraction point. What about the gas leak? Tobias asked, still not understanding that his own murder had been part of their plan. Forget the gas leak. We're burned. Agent Morrison was already coordinating response teams, but Clara's sudden awareness meant we'd lost the controlled environment we'd spent hours creating. All units, suspects are moving to emergency extraction. Unknown location, unknown timeline. Can we track them? Detective Sullivan asked. GPS on Clara's vehicle, but she's smart enough to abandon it. We need to move fast. That's when I made the decision that would either save or damn us all. I'm going in, I announced, already moving toward the van door. Absolutely not. Agent Morrison blocked my path. Caroline, you're a civilian witness, not an operative. I'm the only person who knows all their contingency plans, I argued. Tobias shared backup protocols with me years ago when we were setting up business security procedures. I know where they're going. Where? The old Mitchell construction warehouse on Industrial Drive. It's been abandoned for 3 years, but the utilities are still connected under a shell company Tobias created for tax purposes. Perfect safe house. Detective Santos was already pulling, upbuilding schematics on her laptop. Isolated location, multiple exit routes, minimal civilian population. If they're going to make a stand, that's where they'd do it. All the more reason you're not going in, Agent Morrison insisted. All the more reason I have to, I countered. They think I'm dead. The psychological shock of seeing me alive will disrupt their decision-making, maybe force mistakes, or make them desperate enough to kill everyone in sight. Agent Morrison, I said quietly, these people have murdered at least 14 innocent people and are planning to kill dozens more. The woman they tried to murder is offering to help you stop them. Are you really going to refuse that help because of liability? Concerns? The argument was interrupted by urgent radio chatter. Command, we have movement at the warehouse. 2 vehicles approaching from different directions. That's them, I confirmed, recognizing the tactical approach Tobias had outlined in our old security discussions. Clara and Tobias in separate vehicles, planning to rendezvous inside before moving to final extraction. Agent Morrison looked at me for a long moment, weighing operational necessity against federal protocol. If you do this, you follow orders exactly. No heroics, no personal vendettas. Understood. And you wear full tactical gear with communication equipment. Agreed. 30 minutes later, I was crouched behind a concrete barrier 200 yards from the warehouse, wearing borrowed federal body armor and listening to tactical chatter through an earpiece. The transformation from dead woman to active participant in a federal operation felt surreal. Thermal imaging shows 2 heat signatures inside the building, Agent Morrison reported. Ground floor, eastern section. 3rd signature approaching. From the northwest, another voice added. Single individual, moving carefully. That would be Mason, either escaped from custody or never actually captured. My blood chilled as I realized our operation might have failed before it even began. Negative, Detective Santos corrected through the radio. Mason still in federal custody. Unknown third party approaching. Could be the broker, I suggested. Emergency extraction might include direct oversight. Or it could be backup we didn't know about, Agent Morrison replied grimly. Either way, we're now dealing with 3 suspects instead of 2. The warehouse erupted in activity as Clara and Tobias realized they weren't alone. Through night vision scopes, we watched them take defensive positions while the 3rd figure circled the building. This is escalating beyond our control parameters, Agent Morrison said. We need to move before they establish a coordinated defense. Wait, I whispered, studying the 3rd figure's movement pattern. That's not backup. Look at the approach vector. What am I looking for? Whoever that is, they're not coordinating with Clara and Tobias. They're positioning for assault, not support. The realization hit us simultaneously. The 3rd party wasn't there to help Clara and Mason escape. They were there to eliminate them. Clean slate protocol, Detective Sullivan said grimly. The broker isn't extracting them. He's cleaning up loose ends. Which means everyone in that warehouse is a target, including the federal agents about to breach it. The tactical situation had just shifted from controlled arrest operation to active combat scenario involving unknown shooters, professional killers, and federal agents caught in the crossfire. New plan, Agent Morrison announced. We extract our people and establish a perimeter until we can identify all parties involved. No, I said firmly. If we withdraw now, Clara and Tobias escape or die before we can get the information we need about the larger network. Either way, Elena Rodriguez and 30 other marked targets remain in danger. Your alternative? I looked at the warehouse, where my husband and his conspirators were about to be murdered by their own criminal organization, while federal agents prepared to risk their lives capturing killers who might not survive the next hour. I walk in the front door, I said simply. Caroline Mitchell rises from the dead, and we see how everyone reacts when the supposedly perfect crime falls apart in real time. The silence on the radio was absolute as everyone processed the implications of my proposal. Caroline, Agent Morrison said carefully, that's either brilliant or suicidal. Sometimes, I replied, checking the pistol Detective Sullivan had insisted I carry. Those are the same thing. The warehouse door opened with a rusty shriek that announced my resurrection to everyone inside. I stepped into the darkness wearing tactical gear and carrying evidence files. No longer Caroline Mitchell the victim, but Caroline Mitchell the destroyer of worlds. Hello, Tobias. The sound of my voice in that abandoned space was like a gunshot. 3 figures spun toward me with weapons raised, their faces cycling through shock, disbelief, and terror in rapid succession. Tobias dropped his gun entirely, his hands shaking as he stared at his supposedly dead wife. That's impossible. You're dead. I saw the blood, the broken railing. You saw what I wanted you to see, I replied calmly, stepping further into the room while federal agents moved to secure all exits. Just like you've been seeing what Clara and Mason wanted you to see for the past year. Clara's recovery was faster than Tobias's, her professional training overriding personal shock. Federal operation, she said flatly, weapons still trained on me. How long have you known? Since Tuesday night when I heard you planning my murder in my own office. Every word, every detail, every backup plan. I recorded all of it. Recorded. What? The third figure stepped into the light, and I found myself facing a woman in her 50s with silver hair and cold eyes. This had to be the broker herself, not just another cleanup specialist. Everything, I said, pulling out a tablet and activating the audio files. My voice and theirs filled the warehouse as Tuesday night's planning session played back in crystal. Clarity. The insurance policy is solid, $2.5 million. But we have to be careful about the timing. Tobias's recorded voice discussing my murder while his live face crumpled in horror at hearing himself. The psychological impact was exactly what I'd hoped for. Complete breakdown of their operational cohesion. That's not all, I continued, switching files. Portland. David Hudson and Marcus Chen, Nevada. Jennifer Walsh and her partner Michael. Torres, Arizona. Robert Kim and Linda Chen. Should I continue? The broker's expression shifted from annoyed efficiency to genuine concern. How much do you know? I know you've been running a murder-for-hire network across 8 states for the past 6 years. I know you recruit teams like Clara and Mason to infiltrate small businesses and eliminate successful owners for their assets. I know Elena Rodriguez in Seattle is your next target. Elena who? Tobias asked, finally understanding that he'd been a small part of something much larger and more deadly. Your replacement victim, Clara said dismissively. After we killed you in 6 months, we were moving to Seattle for our next assignment. The casual revelation that his own death had been scheduled broke whatever remained of Tobias's composure. You were going to kill me too? Clean slate protocol, the broker explained matter-of-factly. Witnesses become liabilities. Partners become complications. Just like Marcus Chen in Portland, I added, and Michael Torres in Nevada, and every other partner who helped you kill their business associates. Agent Morrison's voice crackled through my earpiece. Caroline, we have movement on the perimeter. Additional vehicles approaching from multiple directions. The broker heard it too, her head tilting toward sounds only experienced criminals recognize. Backup? She asked Clara. We didn't call for backup, Clara replied, confusion evident in her voice. Neither did we, the broker said grimly. Which means someone else knows about this location. The warehouse erupted in chaos as multiple entry points exploded inward simultaneously. Federal tactical teams poured through doorways and windows, while searchlights flooded the space with blinding white light. Federal agents! Drop your weapons! But the confusion was just beginning. The vehicles Agent Morrison had detected weren't law enforcement backup. They were competing criminal organizations who'd been tracking the broker's network. Rival operation, Detective Sullivan's voice came through my earpiece. Intelligence suggests multiple criminal enterprises have been consolidating territory. This might be a hostile takeover. Gunfire erupted as 3 separate factions, federal agents, the broker's people, and unknown shooters, engaged in a firefight that turned the warehouse into a war zone. I dove behind a concrete pillar as bullets shattered windows and ricocheted off metal beams. Through the chaos, I could see Tobias crawling toward an exit while Clara and the broker took defensive positions. Caroline, get out of there! Agent Morrison shouted through the radio, but I wasn't leaving without the evidence that would destroy their entire network. The broker's briefcase lay abandoned near her original position, containing what looked like financial records and target files. Moving between cover points, I reached the briefcase just as Clara spotted me. Her gun tracked toward my position, finger tightening on the trigger. The shot that followed came from an unexpected direction, Tobias, who'd apparently decided that saving his wife was more important than preserving his criminal conspirators. Clara's weapon clattered across the floor as she clutched her shoulder, her professional composure finally cracking into rage and pain. You idiot! They're going to execute you anyway! Maybe, Tobias said, his own gun now pointed at the broker. But at least I won't die knowing I helped murder my wife. Too little, too late. But perhaps the beginning of redemption for a man who'd lost his way completely. The firefight ended, as abruptly as it had begun when federal reinforcements arrived in overwhelming numbers. The rival criminal faction retreated under heavy fire, while the broker's remaining people surrendered rather than face federal tactical teams. In the sudden silence, surrounded by law enforcement and broken glass, I found myself holding evidence that would not only convict the people who'd tried to kill me, but potentially dismantle an entire criminal enterprise. Clara Martinez, Mason Richards, and Tobias Mitchell, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and violations of federal racketeering statutes, Agent Morrison announced as tactical teams secured the scene. But it was the broker's arrest that felt most significant. Margaret Voss, also known as the broker, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder across multiple states, racketeering, and operating a criminal enterprise. Margaret Voss. After years of being a voice on encrypted phones, the broker finally had a name and face. As they led the conspirators away in federal custody, I realized that Caroline Mitchell's death had saved not just her own life, but potentially dozens of future victims who would never know how close they'd come to being murdered for their success. The price of justice was high, but the cost of letting them continue would have been immeasurable. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom, watching justice unfold with the methodical precision of a perfectly executed architectural plan. The trial of United States versus Voss, Martinez, Richards, and Mitchell had become the largest criminal conspiracy case in the Western District's history. Margaret Voss, the broker, faced 17 counts of conspiracy to commit murder across 6 states. Her network had been more extensive than even we'd imagined. 43 confirmed victims, with investigations ongoing in 12 additional cases. The defendant operated a sophisticated criminal enterprise, the federal prosecutor explained to the jury, that specifically targeted successful small business owners for assassination and financial exploitation. This was not random violence, but calculated murder for profit. Clara Martinez and Mason Richards faced charges in 14 separate murders. Their methodical killing spree across 5 years had left families destroyed and businesses ruined, all to feed their greed and fund their luxurious lifestyle. The evidence we'd gathered during those terrifying 3 days had proven overwhelming. Recorded confessions, financial records, surveillance footage, and testimony from surviving family members of their victims created an unshakable case. The defendants celebrated Mrs. Mitchell's supposed death with champagne. Detective Sullivan testified, his voice carrying controlled anger. They toasted her murder while sitting in her own office, discussing how to spend her insurance money. Miles Patterson had negotiated a plea deal in exchange for testimony about insurance fraud spanning 6 years and dozens of suspicious claims. His cooperation revealed the financial infrastructure that had enabled the killing spree. They would approach me with what seemed like routine claim processing, he explained to the jury. But the patterns were always the same. Workplace accidents, structural failures, always involving recent policy increases. The most difficult testimony came from Elena Rodriguez, the Seattle architect who'd been selected as their next victim. FBI agents had contacted her just hours before Clara and Mason's planned arrival in Washington. "I had no idea anyone was planning to kill me," she said, her voice shaking. "My business partner had started suggesting policy changes, bringing in new contractors. If Mrs. Mitchell hadn't exposed them, I'd be dead." But the moment that defined the entire trial was Tobias's testimony about his own planned murder. "They told me I would have a gas leak accident 6 months after Caroline's death," he said, unable to meet my eyes from the witness stand. "I was so focused on betraying my wife that I never realized they were planning to kill me too." His cooperation had been complete, providing details about offshore accounts, shell companies, and criminal contacts that extended the federal investigation into 3 additional states. The verdicts, when they came, were swift and absolute. Margaret Voss, life without parole on 17 counts of conspiracy to commit murder. Clara Martinez, life without parole on 14 counts of murder in the first degree. Mason Richards, life without parole on 14 counts of murder in the first degree. Miles Patterson, 15 years for fraud and accessory charges. Tobias Mitchell, 25 years for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder. "Justice has been served," Judge Patricia Morrison announced as she delivered the sentences. Not just for Caroline Mitchell, but for all the victims whose lives were stolen by this criminal enterprise. Walking out of the courthouse into bright afternoon sunlight, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: genuine peace. The woman who'd entered that warehouse 6 months ago seeking revenge had found something better: closure for 43 families and safety for countless future victims. Detective Sullivan, now promoted to Captain Sullivan, joined me on the courthouse steps. "So what's next for Caroline Mitchell?" I looked at the city skyline, thinking about the architectural firm I was rebuilding and the victim advocacy foundation I'd established with the recovered insurance money. "The same thing that was always next," I said. "Building something that lasts. But this time, I'd be building it with the wisdom that comes from having died and returned to life, stronger and infinitely more careful about who I trusted with the blueprints." 1 year after my resurrection, I stood on the observation deck of the new Clearwater Springs Community Center, a building I'd designed to honor the victims of the brokers' network. 43 names were etched in granite near the entrance. People who'd been murdered for their success, their dreams cut short by greed and calculated evil. The Caroline Mitchell who'd discovered her husband's betrayal would barely recognize. The woman I'd become. Harder, certainly. More cautious, absolutely. But also more purposeful than I'd ever imagined possible. Mitchell and Associates had been rebuilt from the ground up, with new partners carefully vetted through processes that would make federal background checks seem casual. Nikita had joined as head of security, bringing investigative expertise that ensured we'd never again be vulnerable to infiltration. "Morning review meeting in 10 minutes, Misty Patterson announced, entering my office with the morning's project, files. She'd finished her degree early and become my most trusted associate, her attention to detail having saved not just my business, but potentially her own life. The Mitchell Foundation for Victim Advocacy had grown beyond anything I'd originally envisioned. Elena Rodriguez served as our West Coast coordinator, helping other small business owners recognize and defend against criminal infiltration. What had started as personal revenge had evolved into a network protecting entrepreneurs across the country. "How many alerts this week?" I asked, reviewing the Foundation's monitoring reports. 17 potential cases flagged by our algorithm, Misty replied. 3 involving insurance policy changes that match historical patterns. 8 with new partner additions that triggered background check concerns. The early warning system we'd developed could identify businesses being targeted before infiltration occurred. Not perfect, but effective enough to have prevented 6 confirmed murder attempts in the past year. My phone buzzed with a text from Captain Sullivan. "Margaret Voss died in federal prison last night. Natural causes. Thought you should—" No. The broker's death felt anticlimactic after everything she'd orchestrated. But perhaps that was appropriate. Evil rarely ends with dramatic flourishes, just the quiet stopping of a heartbeat that had caused so much pain. As I prepared for the day's meetings, I reflected on the strange journey from victim to survivor to protector. The woman who'd hidden behind her office door listening to her murder being planned would never have imagined becoming someone who actively hunted those who preyed on success. But transformation, I'd learned, was just another form of architecture. You demolished what was broken, built stronger foundations, and created something that could withstand whatever storms came next. The Caroline Mitchell who'd died at Ravens Point Bridge was gone forever. What remained was someone who understood that the best revenge wasn't destruction of your enemies, but protection of their future victims. Sometimes the greatest victory was simply ensuring that the story ended with you, and that no one else would have to endure what you'd survived. Outside my office window, Clearwater Springs continued its quiet existence. A little safer, because one woman had refused to stay dead when dying would have been convenient for everyone else. That seemed like legacy enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.